Hello, Petal. Thank you for coming back for Chapter 12 of You Don't Have to Be Evil to Work Here, but It Helps. J.W. Wells & Co. Book 4 by Tom Holt, whom you'll love, because he's awesome. I am always very grateful for you joining me. I'm very grateful for the comments, for the likes, shares, the follows. You know, please hit the notifications bell because it all helps the channel. And I know I whiffle on about it. You probably hear it from every channel you listen to on YouTube. But it really does help us to keep going. So if you could do that for me, I'll be so grateful. And I'll keep reading for you. Okay, Chapter 12.
So,
said the face of ultimate evil, helping itself to crisps.
what shall we talk about?
Colin looked furtively round. It amazed him that nobody seemed to have noticed anything. Here he was, perched on a bar stool next to the quintessence of all nightmares in a crowded suburban pub, and not so much as a head had turned or an eyebrow flickered. True, Oscar had dressed appropriately for the occasion. It was wearing a fawn suede sort of bomber jacket thing that more or less shrieked M&S casual, with sand-coloured chinos, a white button-down shirt and trainers. Trini and Susanna would have expressed guarded approval, a bit overstated perhaps, a smidgen 90s in a sort of self-referential way. That, however, was beside the point. Ultimate evil in a nice schmutter is still ultimate evil, so why was it nobody was backing away or running, screaming out into the street?
Oscar said, allow me.
A hand extended and laid a shiny coin on the flannel bar towel. Colin looked at it in mute horror. What's that for? He said.
A penny,
Oscar replied.
For your thoughts. It's traditional, isn't it?
No, it's just the coin wasn't just shiny. It was red hot. A wisp of smoke was curling up from the charred towel. As the mopped-up beer evaporated, the penny cooled to a dull charcoal grey. Just a what?
Expression,
Colin said hoarsely.
Just an expression.
I understand. Humorous?
What? I mean, no, not very. Just something you say.
Just the words then, but no physical coin. It cleared its throat.
A penny for your thoughts,
it said. Colin tried for a nonchalant shrug, but it came out as a squirm. Nothing much. Wool gathering.
Wool?
Another one. Expression.
My goodness,
Oscar said.
You seem to use a great many expressions, if I may say so.
It paused and sniffed.
In any event,
it went on.
I believe I can hazard a guess as to what you were preoccupied with. You were wondering why none of the other mortals in this building have reacted with horror, disgust, or distress at my appearance.
Colin mumbled, that sort of thing. Anyway,
I can explain, should you wish for me to do so.
Can you? I mean, that's great. Yes, please.
It's quite simple,
Oscar said.
I'm shielded by a strong piece of effective magic, known as a glamour, which prevents anybody not party to our contract from seeing me as I truly am. Our fellow customers, therefore, see only an entirely nondescript young man in expensive casual clothes. Of course, if there was such a thing as an imp-reflecting mirror on the premises, my disguise would be wholly ineffectual. Since, however, that is an unlikely contingency, the danger is trivial and can be dismissed. There remains, of course, the possibility that I might be seen and recognized by a sensitive, that is to say, a mortal with strong latent magic power. The odds against that, however, are slightly less than 500,000 to 1, having considered the risk and viewed it in the context of the benefit to our relationship of a bonding exercise such as the one we are embarked upon. I resolved to adopt what you might describe as a devil-may-care attitude to humour,
Oscar added,
in the form of wordplay. You need not refrain from laughter on my account.
Colin stared at it in bewilderment for a moment, then managed to come up with a gurgle, the sort of noise you'd expect from a drowning kitten.
You have entirely consumed your beverage,
Oscar said.
Are you in need of a further supply?
Colin nodded. Yes, he said, with feeling.
I see. I believe it is your turn to buy.
Right, Colin said. Same again.
Certainly. I have never sampled alcohol before. Its effects are curious, although it is a depressant. By sedating the part of the brain that controls natural inhibitions, it inspires a sense of well-being, verging on recklessness. When you return with further beverages, we should play pool.
At the bar, Colin seriously considered running away from the pub to the station. 600 yards. A train would take him via Clapham Junction to Gatwick. Oh, bugger, no passport. He could go to Waterloo instead. Someone had told him it was possible to dodge passport control on the Eurostar, though he doubted it. Or Dover, somewhere like that. Perhaps he could stow away in the back of a lorry.
I've changed my mind.
Colin's head spun round. Oscar was standing next to him.
Instead of beer, I think I would like to try a measure of fermented spirits. What is the colourless liquid in the bottle with the red label?
So much for unobtrusive escape. Bacardi, Colin said mournfully. It's a sort of rum.
Rum?
Oscar repeated.
What is rum?
What? Colin frowned, trying to remember. Somehow he found it hard to concentrate on anything with the common enemy of man standing 18 inches away from him. Sugarcane, I think. They sort of squash it up and distill it, and then I believe it's put aside to mature in big barrels.
Mature?
You've got to keep it for several years before it's ready to drink.
Oh.
Oscar nodded a couple of times.
Rum isn't built in a day.
It made a faint rattling noise, like the cough of a 60-a-day Nazgul.
It seems that alcohol is also conducive to humour.
Absolutely, Colin replied. Oh, look, the pool table's free. When he'd racked up the coloured balls and positioned the black and the white, Colin asked, Have you played this game before?
No,
Oscar replied.
Explain the rules and the function of the long, tapered sticks.
It picked up a cue and touched the tip as though expecting it to be sharp.
These implements have an aerodynamically efficient profile,
it said.
Do we throw them at each other?
Colin explained the rules, and they played a game. Oscar's first shot after the break was a fiendishly difficult long pot to the top left-hand corner, flawlessly executed. To his surprise, however, Colin won.
You have prevailed,
Oscar said.
State your requirements.
Excuse me?
The nature of the penalty,
Oscar replied, bowing its head.
At home, when we play games, the loser has to endure a punishment devised by the winner. Decapitation or ritual disemboweling are traditional choices. But the decision is, of course, yours.
A few heads were beginning to turn, glamour or no glamour. Would you mind keeping your voice down? Colin muttered in mid-cringe. Look, we don't do things like that round here. All right, I mean, thanks for the offer, but... More than a trace of disappointment in Oscar's voice.
Then please explain the purpose of playing this game.
Well, Colin said, for fun.
Oh,
Oscar shrugged. A complex operation.
In that case, we shall play again. We shall enjoy fun.
Depends, presumably, on how you define it, Colin thought. Oscar's version seemed pretty hard to distinguish from outrageous showing off, culminating in a shot of 3 cushions that potted 5 balls simultaneously before nudging the black into the top left. As far as Colin was concerned, however, he was beginning to wonder if he wouldn't have been better off with the ritual disemboweling. Messier maybe, but it wouldn't have attracted quite so much attention. He was also starting to wonder whether pouring ardent spirits down a previously teetotal embodiment of pure evil was entirely sensible. Admittedly, his companions seemed to be having a great time, but there's more to life than sheer naked altruism. Right, he therefore said, after Oscar had won his 6th consecutive game. Well, it's been great, but I've got to be up early for work in the morning, so maybe...
We should now,
Oscar said,
play darts.
So they played darts. Then they had a go on the fruit machines. Colin had never seen anyone get 8 jackpots on the trot before. When he mentioned this, however, Oscar replied that if he made it 9 in a row, there'd be the devil to pay, into which, Colin later admitted to himself, he'd walk like Custer at the Little Bighorn. Then more darts, and then it was closing time. Although Colin had been drinking at 4 times his accustomed rate in order to keep up with Oscar, when the cold outdoors air hit him, he felt wretchedly sober, as though he'd been glugging nothing but Perrier for the past 4 hours.
No,
Oscar said.
We should consume fast food and become nauseous in a shop doorway. Also, we have not yet discussed football, motor vehicles, or the sexual proclivities of female celebrities.
It hiccuped, then made a noise which Colin later figured out must have been a belch.
It will be a tight schedule, but not impossible.
Actually, Colin said. Oscar nodded.
You would prefer to go to your house, where we can drink more alcohol and watch pornographic videos? Or would you rather encompass a violent encounter with a group of strangers?
Actually, Colin said desperately, I think it would be nice if we... He racked his brains for a moderately innocuous suggestion. We could walk down as far as Tesco's and back, he said. A bit of fresh air.
That isn't a traditional male bonding activity,
Oscar objected.
However, if you insist.
It shrugged very slightly and set off at a brisk march, picking up a traffic cone in each hand without breaking stride.
Once we've done that,
it added hopefully,
we could steal a motor vehicle and set light to it.
We'll see, Colin muttered. Maybe it was a fresh air, or simply a difference in metabolic rates. As soon as they reached the Tesco's car park, Oscar folded abruptly at the knees, collided with the stray wire trolley, tripped over the curb and fell over. For some reason it seemed to find this highly amusing. At any rate, it made a noise like a bandsawn aluminium, which Colin assumed, on the balance of probabilities, to be laughter. Now was his chance. A quick sprint, he'd be round the corner and into Drake Street before the epitome of ultimate evil noticed that he'd gone. Straight home, up the stairs, grab his passport and a change of underwear, then a taxi, no faffing around with trains, to Gatwick and the first available flight to somewhere far away. He tensed his leg muscles for the first step.
Your girlfriend,
said Oscar, which was no reason at all for hesitating. After all, she wasn't. They'd been out together once, and that hadn't been a proper date or anything, and he'd stood her up for lunch. That didn't constitute a formal relationship, not even in Utah. Besides, in his mind, he'd already committed himself to fleeing the country, changing his name, and therefore, by implication, never seeing her again. and he was perfectly fine with that, so why the hesitation?
We should talk about her,
Oscar said, still lying face down in the gutter.
Man to man. Further wordplay,
it added.
You may now tell me all about your feelings for her. It does good,
it added, as if quoting, to talk about it. Colin checked his calf muscles, untensed, not going anywhere soon. His moment of resolution had passed. Actually, no, he said, and added, because it does help to talk about it, even to the epitome of ultimate evil, there's no point. We had a row after I stood her up for lunch, and she hasn't spoken to me since.
I see,
Oscar replied.
But this doesn't accord with my information.
Colin blinked. You what?
According to my data,
Oscar said, and then threw up. Objectively speaking, it was a sight worth paying money to see. Blue fire and cascading fountains of sparks and all sorts.
According to my data,
it repeated.
You can't have failed to attend a lunch date, since you have never scheduled such an event with the relevant female.
There was a dribble of orange flame running down Oscar's shirt front, but Colin didn't seem to have noticed. Yes, I did, he said. And anyway, how did you...
Incorrect. You have never broached the subject of sharing food with Ms. Clay. Had you done so, I would have been informed immediately.
Ms. Colin shook his head, as though bewilderment was dandruff. No, you've got it wrong. She's not the one He paused. None of the ultimate evil's beeswax, surely. And if it knew everything about him, so what? He was too insignificant to have any secrets worth hiding. Mostly, he wanted to go home to bed.
Not the one,
Oscar repeated.
Perhaps I used the wrong word by girlfriend. I meant to convey a female for whom you feel powerful emotions of romantic and sexual...
Yes, all right, Colin snapped. Look, would you mind getting up? Because if a policeman sees you like that, we'll both be arrested, and that'd be just about the perfect way to round off a perfect day.
Certainly.
He didn't see Oscar move. One moment it was lying face down in the gutter. The next it was standing beside him, looking relaxed and elegantly dressed. It spoiled the effect rather by falling over again almost straight away.
Allow me to clarify,
it went on, as though nothing had happened.
You are passionately in love with Cassandra Clay, an assistant sorcerer with J.W. Wells and Co.
No, I'm not. Oscar was standing next to him again, this time hanging on to the wire trolley for support.
Please,
it said reproachfully.
We have performed male bonding procedures. We are now...
It paused, waiting for the right word to drop into place.
We are now buddies,
it said.
Accordingly, you feel able to confide in me, and there is no need to deny your true feelings. You madly adore Ms. Clay, who returns your love with equal fervour.
No, Colin said. Sorry, but that's simply not true. The girl I'm interested in is Fam Williams, our new receptionist. Only like I told you, I stood her up for lunch, and now...
Incorrect.
Colin could feel Oscar's displeasure, like an ice cube down the back of his neck.
I do not understand why you should feel the need to lie to me, your mate,
it added. And then the wire trolley skidded sideways under its weight, and it went down like a dynamite, a chimney stack.
Pain,
it said, as though reading out a stage direction.
I can only assume that you are deliberately falsifying data with a view to generating humour. Ha ha. Now will you please confirm that you are in love with Miss Clay?
Colin frowned. If only he'd been a bit quicker off the mark, he could be on his way to Vanuatu by now. On the other hand, somehow Oscar didn't seem quite so terrified now he'd seen it go arse over tit over a wired trolley. "Fine," he said. "If you get up off the floor and let me go home to bed, I'll say anything you like, deal?"
Deal.
"All right then, I'm in love with the clay woman."
Excellent.
Oscar said.
That concludes our lad's night out. Would you like me to give you a lift home?
"In the state you're in, no thank." It hadn't been an offer, except in the Sicilian sense. Oscar reached out, grabbed a handful of Colin's hair, and swung him into the air like a carrier bag. "Fuck, you're hurting me," Colin was about to say, but by then he was sitting on his bed, alone, with the bedside light on, staring at the Deep Space Nine poster his mum had brought for him 10 years ago, and which he'd never got round to taking down off the wall. She was there, of course. Next morning, Colin slouched past her, his head cloudy and fragmented with hangover. She looked straight through him as though he didn't exist. Dad intercepted him before he could crawl into his office and build himself a cosy nest out of brochures and envelopes.
Didn't hear you come in last night,
he growled.
Had a good time, did you?
"No, not really."
Got a thick head by the look of you.
Colin mumbled something about a touch of flu.
Like it matters. Anyhow, book your ideas up. You got a lot to get done today. Meet me in 10 minutes in the tool room.
Colin thought. In the tool room lived a whole lot of big noisy machines. There was the one that went scree, scree, scree. The one that ka-chunk, ka-chink, ka-chunk, ka-chink its way through solid brass bar stock. The scrungle, scrungle, scrungle machine. And the screamy, grindy thing. They were enough to set your teeth on edge at the best of times, and definitely not recommended for anyone with a head full of tactical flu. He gobbled a couple of aspirin, which had no effect whatsoever, and drank a glass of dusty, chalky tap water. There was a welcome surprise waiting for him in the tool room. All the machines were still and silent. In fact, the place seemed to be deserted. Odd. Usually there were half a dozen men working there. Colin looked round for some sort of clue and saw his father approaching.
"All right,"
Dad said.
"Feeling better?"
"No."
"Well, try not to puke up all over the place and create a bad impression."
Colin thought about that for a moment. "We're meeting someone here?" Dad nodded.
"Our new best friend. Yeah,"
he added, and maybe he winced just a little.
"Here he is."
Something had just stepped out from behind the scree machine. He hadn't been there a moment ago because Colin had looked. This morning it was wearing a very sharp Italian light grey suit.
"Talk of the devil,"
it said.
"Good morning. You have both rested sufficiently?" "Fine, thanks,"
Dad replied automatically.
"Right, Colin,"
he went on.
"This is primarily for your benefit, so pay attention. Now, you'll have noticed there's nobody here but us."
Colin nodded. Stupid thing to do.
"That's because yesterday I sent all the men home. We don't need them any more, thanks to Mr.
Dad froze, but Oscar simply bowed its head slightly.
"Today we start doing things a new way, right?"
"Correct," Oscar said, and snapped its fingers. It was a bit like Star Trek, only there was no hum and no shimmering lights. They just appeared, as though the cameraman had stopped filming and started again once they were in position. They didn't look at all like Oscar, and Colin reflected wretchedly that, a mere 24 hours ago, he'd have expected that to be a good thing. They stood at attention until Oscar snapped out a word of command. Then each of them headed for a different machine. They moved like second-rate computer animations, and when they trod in oil stains or patches of wood shavings on the floor, they left no marks. They really did have cloven hooves instead of feet, which goes to show that not all stereotypes are wrong.
"They'll be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week,"
Dad was saying.
"No tea breaks, no unions, no paternity leave, no minimum wage, no wage at all, come to that."
His face darkened for a moment, and Colin saw him deliberately relax it.
"You know," he went on, "if this idea catches on, the manufacturing sector in this country might still have its snowballs."
Oscar didn't seem to be listening to him. It was concentrating very hard, like a conductor standing in front of his orchestra. One by one, the machines started to turn, spin and reciprocate. Colin braced himself for the noise, but there wasn't any.
Completely silent,
Dad said.
Mr. What's it here did explain to me, but it's all a bit technical. Bottom line is, they don't even need the electric, so that's another useful saving. And no noise means we don't have the bloody environmental elf down here every 5 bloody minutes. The fundamental principle,
Oscar started reciting in a dead flat monotone,
is that the elimination of entropy through temporal displacement, because entropy only has effect in time. If you eliminate the passage of time, you effectively negate the first law of thermodynamics. With the result... Something like that, anyhow,
Dad said.
Bloody clever, these people. Give the devil his due,
Oscar said.
There are also significant ecological benefits, including reduced fossil fuel usage, thereby helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Somehow, it came as no surprise to Colin that the powers of darkness were ecologically aware. They probably supported the Kyoto Accords and everything.
And of course,
Dad's steam rolled on,
with these lads on the job, the place will pretty well run itself without us needing to lift a finger, which is why,
he added, turning to Colin,
I'm promoting you, director in charge of production, which means that from now on, all the slots your responsibility. There's no extra money or anything like that, but we might start looking around for a car for you. I was thinking a nice clean Fiesta, something like that.
Inside Colin's head, there was that split second of delay, like during a transatlantic phone call. Did you say director? He asked.
That's right. I mean, there's no rush. Sometimes in the next 6 months, I was thinking. It's a case of waiting until the right car comes along, because it's daft running out and buying the first one you see.
As in, seat on the board and everything? Dad shrugged.
Theoretically, yes, I suppose so,
he said.
But don't let it go to your head. We don't actually have board meetings and stuff, we just all do as I say. Still, if it gives you any pleasure.
Wow, Colin said quietly. Thanks, Dad. For some reason, his gratitude seemed to make Dad uneasy, so he packed it in. Even so, a director of the company, a seat on the board. If he was a company director, surely that meant everybody'd stop treating like a 12-year-old, and... Oscar was grinning. It was, of course, difficult to be sure, given its rather, unconventional facial geography. But Colin was convinced that it could see what it was thinking, and the grin was because he'd taken the bait just as he was supposed to. Fair enough, now I came to think of it. Accepting a seat on the board of Hollinghead and Farron in exchange for his conscience was a bit like selling Manhattan to the palefaces for a handful of shiny beads. He hoped that that was why Dad had just frowned, and that this hadn't been his idea. Not that it was of very great consequence, since Dad was now just one jump ahead of the everlasting barbecue, and there were strange-looking people with cloven hooves all around him operating machinery. Colin's head had started to hurt, and he wanted to get out of there. After all, now that the contract had actually been signed and the new workforce had reported for duty and started their first shift, he'd failed. There was nothing more he could do, in which case...
Look at that!
Dad had picked up a newly fettled widget from one of the plastic bins into which the finished project dropped from the delivery chute.
Lovely piece of work, better than the stuff with the Swiss turnout. They're all right, these lads of yours. I'm delighted to hear you say so,
Oscar replied quietly.
It's a point of pride with us that we always keep our side of the bargain.
That was about as much as Colin could take. Mumbling something about an upset stomach, not a million miles from the truth, he scuttled across the shop floor and through the fire doors and into the backyard. Home, the passport, the station, the airport. After that he wasn't quite sure, but it didn't really matter. He thought of those road signs you get on the outskirts of big towns that say all other destinations. That was exactly where he wanted to go. and he couldn't wait to get there.
Feeling better?
He turned his head. Oscar was standing beside him, directly between him and the side gate. No, Colin said. I think I'd better go home.
Of course.
Oscar nodded, and Colin noticed that it was holding something in its hand, sort of burgundy colour. A little book. A passport. Excuse me, Colin said. Where did you get that from?
Does it matter?
Oscar held it out to him. Colin grabbed at it, but as soon as his fingertips brushed its cover, it vanished. Colin opened his hand and found nothing in it except for a few wisps of pale grey ash.
You won't be needing it,
Oscar reassured him.
Of course. You could go to the station anyway. You'll find it's close for renovation. A complete refit. Very ambitious. If you're thinking about taxis or buses, you should be prepared for a very long wait. You have no car, and walking or even running.
It shook its head.
You could always try.
Colin looked at it for a moment. I might just do that.
Of course,
Oscar said, and stood aside. Colin took 2 steps toward the gate and staggered, pins and needles in both feet, worse than he'd ever felt before, worse than even that time in the tea shop.
Quite,
Oscar said.
In the end, you see, everything eventually turns out to be about true love. If I were you...
It made a sort of wavy gesture with its left hand, and the pins and needles went away again.
I'd go into town and buy myself a nice, smart new suit for being a director in. A small act of celebration would seem to be in order after all.
A suit? Colin said.
Indeed. I believe you look good in a middleweight dark grey wool with perhaps the faintest suggestion of chalk stripes. If you wish, I can come with you and help you choose.
Colin thanked it, but said he'd rather go alone, and left. Once he was a couple of 100 yards away from the factory, he thought, yes, but I can send away for a new passport, and then realised that most likely he couldn't, not if Oscar didn't want him to. Just so when he looked in at the station, it was surrounded by hoardings and scaffolding, and a big blue sign told him of the name of the contractor and the scheduled completion date for Phase 1. There was a long, grumpy queue at the bus stop. He felt that he should stop and apologise to them, but he couldn't think how to explain why it was all his fault. Even so, he went on a bit further, past British Home Stores to the travel agents. Only it wasn't there anymore. In its place was a large, smart-looking Burton's, and the notice in their windows said they were having a special offer on business suits. Well, fine. To paraphrase the words of the poet, you can lead a free man to water, but you can't make him drink. All you can do is drown him. So he went in, but he didn't get himself a nice new suit. Instead, he bought a tie, light blue with little yellow sunflowers on it. It wasn't much. In fact, it was pathetic, a single tea bag thrown into Boston Harbour. Unfortunately, it seemed that it was the best he could do. Colin went back to the factory. On the way, he made a resolution. So, he couldn't save his dad's soul from eternal damnation. So he couldn't do anything about the fact that the workforce had been fired and replaced by non-union demons, hoof legs rather than black legs. Dear God, he was even starting to think like bloody Oscar now. So, he couldn't even run away to the Andaman Islands and start a new life as a beachcomber. There was one thing he could still do to win himself a little smear of happiness on life's windscreen, or at least he could give it a go, although he didn't rate his chances very much. And it'd be a minor act of rebellion against Oscar, who seemed very keen on fixing him up with Cassie Clay. Yes, he could find Fam, blurt out a grovelling apology, and ask her out for a proper date. It was a bit like asking the lifeboat to go back to the sinking Titanic so that he could get his sponge back. But so what? He'd done his best to do the noble, unselfish things and got precisely nowhere. At least finding true love would be doing something, rather than giving up completely. Fam wasn't behind the front desk, where she should have been. Instead, there was someone he was pretty sure he didn't know. He reckoned that he'd have remembered her if he'd met her before. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. She smiled at him. It was the kind of smile that should have stopped him dead in his tracks and left him stammering and glowing bright red like a traffic light. "Hello," she said. "I'm Rosie. You must be Colin."
What are you doing here?"
he said.
"Where's Fam? Miss Williams?"
Rosie looked at him for a moment. Colin had the uncomfortable feeling of being gripped in tweezers, as though she was about to smear him on a glass slide and shove him under a microscope.
"She left,"
Rosie said.
"She left?"
"Yes."
"Why?"
Another smile. If they ever got round to inventing the smile-proof vest, a smile like that would present a very substantial challenge.
"I don't know, do I? I'm just a temp."
A what?"
"Temp. Temporary receptionist. There was an ad in a local paper and I answered it."
Which was a lie, of course. Fam had been there that morning. Unless, of course, she'd given in her notice immediately after Colin had stood her up, and Dad had phoned in the ad as soon as she'd crossed the threshold on her way out. Dates. Copy deadlines. He tried to do the mental arithmetic, but couldn't concentrate.
"Oh," he said. "Look, I need to talk to her about something. Did she leave a number or anything like that?"
Beautiful Rosie shrugged. Her perfectly straight, shoulder-length auburn hair bobbed slightly, like the most beautiful maggot any fish had ever seen squirming on a hook. Complete waste of effort.
"I don't know," she said. "I suppose Mr. Hollinghead Senior might know. Why don't you ask him?"
No point answering that.
"All right," Colin said. "Give me the phone book. I'll look in that."
Rosie got the book for him. Her nails were blood red, perfectly almond-shaped and implausibly long. He grabbed the book and started turning the pages. Shouldn't be difficult, surely. Her dad's initial, he remembered, was E. He rifled pages till he got to Williams. He had no bother at all finding E. Williams in the book. There was a whole page of them, 2 full columns in tiny type, and by some bizarre coincidence, all of them appeared to live in Mortlake. He sighed, closed the book, and set it back across the desk at her. "What's the matter?" Rosie said.
"Nothing."
Colin was about to slouch off when he hesitated. Something about the way she'd looked at him, or rather, something about the very corner of her eye.
"Do I know you from somewhere?"
he asked.
"Me?"
"Yes, you.
Where was your last job?"
A very slight frown, a stunningly lovely frown, sure, but a frown as opposed to a smile.
"Oh, up in the city. Packed it in because I couldn't be bothered with the commuting."
"Especially now that they've closed the station."
"That's right, yes."
Colin looked at Rosie again. Quite definitely, he'd never seen her before in his life. On the other hand, he knew exactly where he'd seen her last.
"Your last job," he said. "It wasn't an outfit called J.W. Wells, was it? 70 St. Mary Axe?"
She looked as though he'd just slapped her or something.
"As a matter of fact, yes, it was," she said. "Fancy you knowing that."
"Yes," Colin said.
"Fancy. Actually," she went on, "that's sort of why I took this job. You see, I remembered the name, what with you been clients of JWW and all. So when I saw your ad in the paper, I thought, there's a funny thing. It felt like it was, I don't know, sort of meant, if you know what I mean."
"Yes," Colin grunted. "I get the general idea."
"So, anyway," Rosie went on, "here I am. I think I'll enjoy working here after JWW. It was always so hectic there. You know, phone always ringing, clients coming in without an appointment. All stressy. This looks like it'd be a nice change of pace."
"Sure," Colin said. "Nothing ever happens here." She looked at him. "Listen," she said. It was a sort of stern cooing, like a turtle dove demanding to see the manager.
"I'm sorry about your friend leaving,
But there's no point getting all tense with me about it, is there? So let's just start again and see if we can't be pleasant, right? If Colin had been a cat, he'd have had his ears flat to the sides of his skull by now. Absolutely, he said. Quite right. Welcome to Hollingshead and Farron, Rosie. Great to have you on board. Thanks. She smiled once more, but he saw it coming in plenty of time, and it whistled past him like a cannonball. Oh, I clean forgot. Oscar said, soon as you got in, could you nip down to the foundry and have a word? Foundry? Colin repeated. Got you. Yes. Cheerio for now, then. He didn't go to the foundry. Instead, he ran up the stairs, 2 steps at a time, to the manky, dusty, cobwebby old cupboard on the second-floor landing, where all the junk and whiffing went to hide. There was all sorts in there. Dead typewriters, broken office chairs, worn-out brooms, 70 years' worth of back numbers of the British Plumbing and Sanitary Gazette. Also, he knew for a fact, there were loads of old phone directories. He'd seen them once, when he'd been looking for something. True, they were very ancient. The most recent one, he recalled, was at least 8 years old, but it was worth having a look, on the assumption that Van's family had lived in the same house 8 years ago. E. Williams. Bingo! Instead of a whole page of the bastards all huddled together in Mortlake like boars in a lager, there was just 2 of them, and one of them lived in Putney. He stuffed the book under his arm, scuttled across the landing to the room where the laser printer lurked, nestled like a fairy tale dragon in his tangled brake of cables, shut the door and sat down. There was a phone on the desk. He reached for it, found the place in the phone book and started dialing. There was a knock at the door, but he ignored it. He waited for the ring. Didn't come. Instead, he got the bagpipe drawn that tells you the number's being cut off. He swore and dumped the phone back on its cradle. More knocking on the door. Screw it, he thought, and yelled, Come in. It was Rosie, and she was smiling. Thought you might like a cup of tea, she said. Not really, Colin replied, but by then she'd put the cup and saucer down on the desk and gone away. He sighed. As it happened, he was quite thirsty, and it was a shame to waste an ice cuppa that he hadn't had to make himself. He liked milk, no sugar, though he was prepared to bet £1 million she already knew that. He picked up the cup and froze. On the rim of the cup, opposite to where he'd been about to put his lips, was a row of little houses, also a tiny dockyard, and a miniature wee jetty extending a centimetre out to sea. The buildings and structures were quaint and oldie-worldy, and there was a minute little signboard, like the ones you get on the railway, telling you the name of the station, that said Boston. 7 millimetres or so from the end of the jetty floated a very small sailing ship, on whose deck scuttled teeny-tiny specks of activity. Colin didn't have a magnifying glass or anything like that, but he reckoned he knew what they were doing. They were throwing stuff over the side of the ship. Just as he was about to throw the cup at the wall and run for it, the dinky little sail unfurled, and on it he saw the ditchy little letters that read, Nice try. Poor Colin. I really do feel for him. He's just... Oh, the poor lad. So, if you enjoyed this chapter, please leave a like or hit the notifications bell, hit the subscribe, share if you want to, leave a comment if you want to. I always like to read them and answer. That's all the blah 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 out of the way. So I've also got a Substack now as well. It's InkR Substack, so it's just if you're on there, just search INKR and I'll be on there somewhere. And that's where I do my book reviews. That's how I'll be babbling on about my narrations that I'm doing for Audible and stuff. And of course I've got my Instagram and other stuff like that as well. But I am always open to suggestions. I love hearing from you guys. It's always appreciated. And yes, we're going to have to start thinking about what book I'm going to do next. All suggestions are welcome and valid. Might not be able to do them all, but let's have a look-see. So, thank you very much for tolerating my babble and my whiffling on. I do appreciate you. Look after yourselves, for the next couple of days until I'm back again, and big kisses and hugs and stuffs. Yes. Take it easy, Petal, and stay safe.